9 days, that is the window. 216 hours before the diplomatic architecture currently holding the situation together begins to collapse. And a new phase of US-Iran confrontation begins. And here is what you need to understand right now before we go any further. This is not a news story. This is not a debate. This is a strategic situation unfolding in real time. And most of the people covering it have no idea what they are actually looking at. Last week, I broke down the JD Vance meeting. The back channels, the specific individuals in that room. If you haven't seen that video, I'm going to put it on screen right now. Watch it after this one. It is the foundation for everything I'm about to tell you. Because here's the thing. That meeting wasn't a conversation. It was a delivery mechanism. A message was sent. And now we are watching the countdown to Iran's response. But here is the piece nobody is telling you about yet. Buried inside this 9-day window is a single strategic variable, a specific choke point, a specific move in the Strait of Hormuz that could make every other scenario on the table irrelevant overnight. I'm going to reveal that X factor at the end of this video. Do not skip ahead. You need the full context for it to land. This is war room economics. Let's get into it. Let's start with what we actually know about the Vance meeting. When a vice president-elect sits down with a foreign intermediary, not the Secretary of State, not a career diplomat, that is not standard operating procedure. That is deliberate. It signals two things simultaneously. First, the incoming administration wants direct, unfiltered communication. No bureaucratic translation, no State Department softening. Second, it is deniable. If the talks collapse, no treaty was signed, no formal framework was violated. The U.S. retains full escalation authority. That is the architecture of a pre-negotiation ultimatum, not a negotiation. An ultimatum with a courtesy label on it. Now, what were the terms reportedly on the table? Initial reporting framed this as a broad offer. Sanctions relief, a pathway back toward economic normalization, the standard diplomatic language you've heard 100 times. But here's what the mainstream media completely missed. According to sourcing from regional security analysts tracking the backchannel communications, the specific terms included a hard cap on uranium enrichment, not at 60%, where Iran currently sits, not even at the 3.67% threshold from the original JCPOA. The reported demand was a verified, inspected rollback combined with a regional proxy activity freeze. That means Hezbollah resupply. That means Houthi operational support. That means every arm of what the Pentagon calls the axis of resistance supply chain. That is not a nuclear deal. That is a grand strategic restructuring disguised as a nuclear deal. And that is why Iran's response has not come quickly, because what is being asked is not a concession. It is a fundamental repositioning of their entire regional security doctrine. The 9-day clock is not arbitrary. It is tied to a specific internal U.S. policy review deadline, after which the diplomatic track designation gets formally removed from the file. Once it's removed, the options that remain on the table look very different. Now, let's talk about the pressure side of this equation, because understanding Iran's actual economic position right now is essential to understanding why this deadline has teeth. Here are the numbers. Cold, hard, no spin. Iran's inflation rate has been running above 40% annually for over 2 years. The Iranian rial has lost approximately 80% of its value against the dollar since 2018. Consumer purchasing power inside Iran is at a multi-decade low, and their primary revenue mechanism, oil exports, is functioning but barely. Tehran has built what analysts call the shadow fleet, a network of aging tankers operating without Western insurance, using ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, with transponders that go dark for days at a time. Customers primarily in China and secondary markets in Asia. At peak efficiency, this shadow fleet moves an estimated 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels per day. That sounds significant. But here's the reality. They are selling at a discount of $10 to $15 per barrel below market rate to incentivize buyers willing to absorb the sanctions risk. That discount is not a rounding error. At that volume, that is $5 to $8 billion per year in lost revenue compared to open market pricing. But here's the detail no one is talking about. The incoming U.S. administration is not primarily targeting the tankers. They are targeting the payment infrastructure, the financial rails that allow shadow fleet transactions to settle, the secondary banks, the front companies in the UAE and Southeast Asia, the cryptocurrency conversion nodes. This is maximum pressure 2.0, and it operates differently than the first iteration. It doesn't just restrict Iran. It makes the cost of doing business with Iran unbearable for every third-party actor in the chain. That means Chinese refineries face a choice: continue purchasing discounted Iranian crude and risk losing access to U.S. financial systems, or walk away. Some will stay, but the volume will compress. And every compressed barrel of export revenue tightens the vice on a government already struggling to pay salaries and subsidize basic goods for a population that is increasingly restless. The economic lever is real, it is loaded, and it is the primary instrument in the 9-day pressure campaign. So where does this go? Let's build the decision tree. Scenario 1, the grand bargain, the carrot. Iran accepts a modified framework. Enrichment rolls back. Proxy activity is verifiably curtailed. In return, staged sanctions relief begins, starting with humanitarian carve-outs and moving toward energy sector access. This is the outcome the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia specifically, are quietly lobbying for. A stable Iran is a predictable Iran. And predictable is good for regional investment flows and Vision 2030 and timelines. Probability based on current signals, low to moderate. The internal political cost inside Iran is very high. Khamenei accepting these terms publicly looks like a capitulation. Scenario 2, maximum pressure 2.0, the stick. No deal is reached. The U.S. formally redesignates the track, snaps back all secondary sanctions, and begins targeted enforcement against shadow fleet infrastructure. No military action, pure economic attrition. This was the playbook from 2018 to 2020. It produced significant economic damage. It did not produce a deal. Probability? High. This is the path of least domestic political resistance for the incoming administration. It looks strong. It avoids the unpredictability of military action, and it keeps all other options open. Scenario 3, the kinetic pivot, escalation. This is the scenario most analysts are discounting, and that discounting may itself be a strategic error. If Iran accelerates enrichment past 90%, weapons grade, or if a proxy action produces American casualties above a specific threshold, the calculus changes entirely. The U.S. does not act alone in this scenario. The operational architecture involves Israeli strike packages that have been in planning and revision cycles for over 18 months. And here is the micro-climax moment of this entire analysis. Based on positioning signals, defense procurement timelines, carrier group deployments, and the specific language coming out of incoming NSC personnel, Scenario 2 is the current administration favorite. But it has a hard trigger built in. If Iranian enrichment crosses a specific technical threshold within the next 60 days, Scenario 2 converts to Scenario 3 automatically. No additional political decision required. The 9-day deadline is not the end of the story. It is the opening of a 60-day window that matters far more. Let's connect this to your portfolio, because this isn't just geopolitics, this moves money. Oil. Brent crude is currently range-bound in the mid to upper 70s. A successful deal could push it toward the low 70s on supply normalization expectations. Maximum pressure 2.0 keeps it in the current range. A kinetic event, any military exchange involving Iranian infrastructure, sends it past $90, potentially past $100 within 72 hours. Gold, already elevated as a geopolitical hedge, remains bid regardless of scenario. Every escalation signal adds fuel. Defense, RTX, LMT, NOC. These names are already pricing in elevated tension. Watch for contract flow signals in the next 30-day procurement cycle as a leading indicator of which scenario the Pentagon is actually preparing for. Now, the X factor. I promised you this. Here it is. The Strait of Hormuz narrows to 21 miles at its choke point. Roughly 20% of global oil supply transits through it daily. Iran has repeatedly threatened closure as a deterrent. But here's what the deterrent framing misses. Iran does not need to physically close the strait to achieve the same economic effect. There is a specific legal and operational loophole, based on maritime law, gray zones around innocent passage rights, that allows Iran to impose compulsory inspection regimes on commercial vessels, not a blockade. An inspection protocol. Slow every tanker transit by 18 to 24 hours through mandatory inspection queuing, and you do not close the strait. You weaponize the queue, insurance rates spike, shipping companies reroute, oil markets price and the friction, even if not a single barrel is physically blocked. This is the move that requires no military escalation, produces maximum economic disruption, and gives Iran a legally defensible position in international forums. If the 9-day deadline passes without resolution, watch the strait, not for a blockade, for an inspection announcement. That is the X factor. Here is where we stand. 16 hours. A vice president-elect who delivered an ultimatum wrapped in diplomatic language. An Iranian economy hemorrhaging under 40% inflation and discounted shadow fleet revenues. A U.S. strategy built on financial strangulation rather than missiles, for now. 3 scenarios. One hidden move in the Strait of Hormuz that changes the game without firing a shot. The most likely path is maximum pressure 2.0. Economic attrition, not kinetic action, but with a hair trigger conversion clause if enrichment thresholds are crossed. The question is whether Tehran reads that trigger correctly. or whether they miscalculate, and we move from an economic briefing to a war briefing. Now I want to hear from you. Will Trump squeeze, or will he deal? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Squeeze or deal? I'm reading every single one. And if you want the full backstory on the Vance meeting, the specific individuals, the intermediary chain, and what was said before the formal terms were delivered, that video is on screen right now. Watch it next. It is the intelligence layer underneath everything I just told you. Stay sharp. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next briefing.